Welcome to the Two Beans in a Pod. Today, we're tackling a really huge question. What comes after neoliberalism? And when we talk about neoliberalism, we're basically looking at those economic ideas that took hold late last century. You know, free markets, deregulation, privatization, stuff that's really shaped the world we live in now. We're going to dive deep into two, incredibly different visions for the future. On one hand, Curtis Yarvin is definitely a controversial figure talking about monarchy. And on the other, Bernie Sanders, who's spent his life pushing for democratic socialism. You're going to hear how they see society's big problems and the really radical changes they think are needed. It's definitely a clash of ideas. Might make you rethink some things about power, democracy, how society maybe should run. Let's jump right in. Okay, so Curtis Yarvin, he's been writing for years, political theory stuff, basically saying American democracy is, a sham, broken beyond repair.
Yeah, and what's really striking is his main proposal. He says American democracy should be swapped out for what he calls a monarchy run by a CEO monarch. Now, he says he uses monarch neutrally, but, it's pretty clear he's thinking top-down efficient system. He even says we need to get over our dictator phobia.
Wow. That's definitely putting it out there. But what about the risks? I mean, concentrating that much power, even if it's supposedly efficient? And why does he think democracy is so bad anyway?
Well, he sees democracy as very weak. He argues it doesn't really do what people want. He'll point to things like mass immigration.
Yeah.
Says big majorities are against it, but it keeps happening. For him, that proves the system's broken. His view is that policy, laws, this stuff should be set by wise experts. People like people in the courts and lawyers and professors. So yeah, he's basically picking aristocracy over democracy.
And he uses history to back this up, right?
Right.
Pulls out specific figures.
He does. Yeah, it's quite interesting. He claims people like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, acted like these CEO monarchs. He brings up FDR's first inaugural address, where Roosevelt basically threatened to take absolute power if Congress wouldn't play ball.
Right, I remember that part.
And he even uses Harold Lakes' diary.
Yeah.
Describing FDR kind of humiliating Francis Perkins and just dictating the New Deal bill himself, like a startup CEO.
Yeah.
And it's not just FDR. He throws George Washington and Abraham Lincoln in there, too. Calls them national CEOs,
right,
running the government like a company from the top down. Oh, and Alexander Hamilton. He's apparently a startup bro.
So his argument is basically that we've had these kinds of strong leaders before, we just didn't call them monarchs. That's quite a spin on history.
So that's exactly his point, yeah. And he brings it to the present, too.
Right.
Says companies like Apple or Tesla are like little monarchies, and they work, right. They're efficient because they're top-down command structures. He literally asks, if Apple ran California, wouldn't that be better? He even sort of jokingly points out that the New York Times, trusted source and all that, is managed like a fifth-generation hereditary absolute monarchy. So it does make you think about, what efficiency actually looks like versus how we perceive it.
But these interpretations, they must get a lot of pushback, right? His historical claims sound pretty provocative.
Oh, definitely. He gets a lot of criticism for what people see as cherry-picking history, or maybe even rewriting it. Like, he suggests there was no genocide in Europe between 1000 AD and the Holocaust. Yeah. Which seems to just dismiss things like the French Wars of Religion or, the Albigensian Crusade. These are really bold claims.
Right.
It feels like he's trying to dismantle the standard historical stories to make space for his own radical ideas, challenging us maybe to question our basic beliefs about progress, morality, that kind of thing. And then there's the parallel he draws between Anders Breivik and Nelson Mandela.
Wait, Breivik and Mandela?
Yes. He calls them both terrorists because, in his view, they violated rules of war and killed innocents.
That's incredibly controversial.
It is. And his take on the post-Civil War era for freed slaves, he calls it a tumultuous and challenging period, arguing the war didn't make life more pleasant for anyone, even them. These are definitely stark, challenging historical views, not mainstream for sure.
So, okay, beyond the history and the critique of democracy, he also has some, let's say, controversial takes on social groups. And his own writing style seems to swing between serious argument and, being kind of trollish. How does that all fit together?
Right. Well, he says things like women in Jane Austen novels, before they could vote, seemed kind of okay. And he claims voting gives people an almost kind of pornographic stimulus, not actual power. It seems to come from this rejection of modern social norms, maybe embracing more hierarchical ideas. As for the writing style, he puts the harsher stuff down to different emphasis over time, says he's less trolley now. But he insists the core ideas, the convictions, are serious. He talks about enlightenment not as believing something new, but as disbelieving that current institutions, like Harvard or the New York Times, are somehow divinely inspired or inherently right.
Okay.
And he sees his ideas connecting with people in power, mentioning J.D. Vance as a normie who can talk to both regular Americans and the elite, speak the language of the New York Times. He even saw Trump as having some FDR-like qualities, charisma, cutting through the BS, as he puts it. But he thinks Trump's lack of an aristocratic background hurt his confidence, his ability to delegate effectively.
So when you boil it all down, what's the core message you take away from Yarvin, especially about what's wrong now?
I think it really comes down to this deep conviction that an effective government and an efficient government is better for people's lives. Full stop. And for him, the only way to get that is through this radical top-down overhaul. It's a fundamental challenge to the very effectiveness of democracy as we understand it. He really frames it all as just practical, efficient solutions for what he sees as a totally broken system.
Okay. Let's completely switch gears now. Let's turn the page to Bernie Sanders. He gives a totally different diagnosis of America's problems and, a very different path forward.
Absolutely. Sanders starts from the belief that the, quote, uber-capitalist economic system is fundamentally wrong. He calls it grossly immoral, unjust, and rigged. He sees this massive concentration of wealth, of power, in the hands of what he calls oligarchs. And he says these oligarchs effectively own America and even own its democracy.
He definitely doesn't mince words there either. What does he mean exactly by oligarchs owning democracy and media? How does he see that working?
Well, he gets specific. He talks about billionaires spending tens of billions on campaign contributions, billions more on lobbying, basically buying politicians and policies. And the media part, he points out that something like 90% of U.S. media is controlled by just 8 huge conglomerates.
Right, like Comcast, Disney, Fox.
Exactly. And then he adds another layer. Those conglomerates are themselves partly owned by just 3 massive Wall Street firms: BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. These firms control over $20 trillion in assets. Trillion. So his argument is this setup guarantees the media won't ask the really embarrassing questions. They won't challenge the powerful position of their own owners.
Okay, so for Sanders, the economic system itself is the root cause. And this leads to what he calls diseases of despair.
Precisely. He highlights just staggering inequality numbers. The 3 richest billionaires owning more wealth than the entire bottom half of society. The top 1% owning more than the bottom 92%. CEOs making 400 times what their average workers make. And he argues this creates massive economic insecurity for millions. That insecurity then shows up as these diseases of despair. He means things like drug addiction, suicide rates climbing. He points to the U.S. life expectancy actually declining compared to other rich countries, and huge gaps within the U.S. itself based on wealth. Poorer people dying much younger, being hit harder by things like pollution. It's a really grim picture he paints of the human cost.
So if the current system is that destructive in his view, what's his solution? What's the transformation he wants to see? What comes next?
His answer is always transformational change that comes from the bottom on up, not top down like Yarvin. It's the complete opposite approach. Really, Sanders' whole vision seems to be about redefining freedom. He argues that political freedom doesn't mean much without economic security, without people having democratic control over the big institutions that shape their lives. So his key proposals reflect that. Things like an economic bill of rights, guaranteeing things like decent job, healthcare, education, food, housing. He actually points back to FDR's 1944 State of the Union for this idea.
Okay.
Medicare for all. A public system. Healthcare is a human right, like in Canada or other places. He argues it would save billions by negotiating drug prices. Free public education, all the way from childcare up through graduate school. He often mentions Finland as a model, focusing on learning, investing in teachers, free college, worker empowerment. He wants to basically double union membership, create strong federal protections so workers can't be fired unfairly, push for first contract rules so unions can actually get agreements. He looks at places like Scandinavia, highly unionized, where workers generally have higher wages, better benefits, report being happier.
Makes sense from his perspective.
Then there's workplace democracy. He wants workers on corporate boards suggesting 45% of seats, and promoting employee-owned companies like the Mondragon Cooperative in Spain. He also tackles automation, suggests taxing robots, an idea he credits Bill Gates with, to fund retraining workers, shortening the work week, maybe a 4-day week, and much stronger antitrust action to break up the big tech giants.
What about the media control he mentioned?
Yeah, he proposes a new deal for journalism. Basically, significant public funding for diverse nonprofit media, local and national, to counter that corporate dominance and fight against news deserts. And finally, big electoral reforms, overturning Citizens United, getting public funding for elections, but also structural stuff. Abolish the Electoral College, rethink the Senate, reform the Supreme Court, make democracy itself more inclusive, more representative.
He also tackles that really tricky question, doesn't he, about why so many working-class people vote for someone like Donald Trump, who seems opposed to their economic interests, at least from Sanders' view.
He does, and he's very clear. He doesn't think all Trump supporters are just racists, sexist, and homophobes. He argues many are working-class people who are struggling, angry, frustrated, and he believes the Democratic Party has largely ignored that anger. Republicans, he says, then exploit that frustration. They scapegoat minorities, immigrants, other groups to distract from the real culprits who he identifies as the people with the wealth and power.
So, given all that, what's his message to the Democratic Party itself?
He wants a total transformation, again, from the bottom on up. He wants the Democrats to become a real movement party, one that's unequivocally on the side of working families, fighting for economic, social, racial justice all year round, not just showing up at election time. He has this great line: the danger for the Democratic Party is not being too bold, it's being too cautious.
Okay, so we've laid out these two starkly different visions from Yarvin and Sanders. Now, let's really try to picture them going head-to-head. Imagine them debating what should come after neoliberalism.
Right, picture that debate. Curtis Yarvin and Bernie Sanders. Their visions are just poles apart, aren't they? But interestingly, both claim they're offering a path to a better society for the, quote, common good.
Okay, let's set the stage. You've got Yarvin on one side, efficiency through the CEO monarchy, democracy is weak, an illusion. And then Sanders on the other, economic democracy, power from the bottom up, dismantle the oligarchy, empower workers. How would they clash? Let's start with governance and efficiency.
Okay, so on governance and efficiency, Yarvin would likely argue, look, my CEO monarch can act decisively. No democratic gridlock, no bureaucracy. Think like a startup. He'd say they could deliver cool space like SpaceX or run government efficiently like Apple is run. That leads to a better, more effective state. He'd bring up his FDR examples again.
And Sanders' response?
Sanders would just fire back, saying that kind of system inevitably concentrates power. It creates more oligarchy, leads to more exploitation, more injustice for most people. He'd argue true efficiency has to serve everyone, not just profit. He'd probably say a system where 3 Wall Street firms control $20 trillion, where healthcare is run for profit. That's the definition of dysfunctional, not efficient. He'd repeat his line: we need economic democracy every bit as much as we need political democracy.
Okay, what about the role of elites? They both talk about elites, but very differently.
Very differently. On the role of the elite, Yarvin basically argues for a benevolent aristocracy, right? Yeah. Policy should be set by wise experts. He'd probably use his New York Times example again, say, even trusted institutions are run like monarchies, it works. He sees his idea spreading quietly through staffers and younger people in the system, a sort of slow, quiet revolution from within the elite.
And Sanders?
Sanders would say today's elites are the problem. They use their wealth to buy control of our elections and the policies. He'd hammer on how corporate interests dictate everything, leading to policies that enrich the few and hurt everyone else. How the media they own just dumbs down the whole debate. He'd probably just flat out demand we need to do away with billionaires. Completely different view of who the elite is and what they do.
History comes up a lot for both of them, too. How would they use historical lessons against each other?
Good question. On historical lessons and change, Yarvin might point to what he sees as the stability of old monarchies, Europe before democracy really took hold. Or he'd use his controversial takes on the Civil War, or maybe Mandela, to argue history doesn't clearly prove democracy is best. He implies real change means breaking completely with current norms, maybe looking back further.
Okay.
Sanders, though, would lean heavily on the history of struggle, the fight against slavery, women's suffrage, civil rights, the union movement under FDR. He'd stress these huge changes came from the bottom on up, through mass movements, not gifted by wise rulers. He'd probably point to his own campaigns, built on small donations, shaking up the establishment, as proof that bottom-up change is possible now.
And finally, that idea of the common good. They both invoke it, but what does it actually mean to each of them?
Yeah, that's maybe the most fundamental difference, on the common good. For Yarvin, the common good seems tied to national efficiency, prosperity, order, managed from the top. Like a king, Charles I maybe, or even Elon Musk, they want their operation to flourish. And that flourishing is the common good, in his view.
Right, a well-run machine.
Exactly. Whereas for Sanders, the common good is defined very concretely by people's material lives. It means ending poverty, ending homelessness, guaranteeing healthcare and education as rights, ensuring living wages, tackling climate change. He'd likely say something like unfettered capitalism isn't just creating economic misery. It's destroying our health, our well-being, our democracy, and our planet. It's about human dignity and planetary survival for him.
It's just so clear, isn't it? They both see a deep sickness in modern society. They both criticize this neoliberal order that we're in, but they're prescriptions for what comes next. They're just fundamentally incompatible. Yarvin is looking at concentrated power, top-down efficiency, almost stepping back from messy democracy, while Sanders sees the only answer in more democracy, radical economic and political democracy built from the ground up.
It really does force you to think about your own foundational assumptions, doesn't it? About how society should work. Is the main goal efficiency, however defined, or is it about widespread participation and democratic control, even if that's sometimes messy?
That contrast really gets to the heart of disagreements about power, about maybe even human nature itself. What an incredible juxtaposition. A true deep dive into two profoundly different answers to that huge question, what comes next? If you found this dive as fascinating and thought-provoking as we did, please do take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps us bring more conversations like this to you. Thank you for listening to Two Beans in a Pod. If you are interested in the book, please order it from the link below.